have thought that a reboot of a 50-year-old video game console would live rent-free in so many people's heads, and it hasn't even come out yet? Let's unpack the hysteria and find out what the heck is going on this episode of It's All Dug in Games. You probably know by now if you've been watching, I do love Atari. I have a sincere affection for all things Atari, so it won't surprise you to know that I have had great interest in the upcoming Atari 2600 Plus console that is coming out in November, developed and released by Atari. And I gotta tell you, this is really an interesting release because I don't think I can remember something coming out from Atari, or for that matter, any retro game console maker that has stirred more emotion and passion in terms of the opinions and the thoughts about said product. And I think I've got some pros and some cons about not just the 2600 Plus, but what Atari's been doing lately in terms of their own marketing and their own branding, if you will. So let's get started with the Atari 2600 Plus. There are a few common criticisms or things that people are taking issue with in the Atari community as well as in the gaming YouTuber community. The most prolific concern that I'm seeing raised is comparisons between the Atari 2600 Plus and what I'll go ahead and call the ill-fated Retron 77 that came out back in late 2017. It too purported to be a system that would allow you to take your existing Atari 2600 cartridges that you've got in the basement, your office, your desk drawer, what have you, play them on a modern TV set. I mean, that's the main use case for something like this. It did not go well, in my humble opinion. As has been pointed out by a number of people, the compatibility level of this device was poor. There were a lot of popular cartridges that just didn't work. And this is where things get interesting, because I'm seeing a lot of people claiming that it didn't work for this reason or that reason. And I think the truth is somewhere like in between all the different theories and speculation as to what exactly caused the Retron 77 to fail. The first piece that the Retron 77 used back in 2017 was an emulator called Stella. Now, Stella is arguably the number one most widely used emulator solution to play Atari games right from the ROMs on your PC, on your Mac, on your Linux box, on your toaster, you name it. The problem, I think, that the folks that made the Retron 77, the poor situation that they put themselves in right out of the bat, is they used, at the time, an old version of Stella. The version they used was from December-ish 2012. An extremely old version of this emulator with itself poor compatibility issues. Compounding that, the other piece of the pie, this hardware solution called a cartridge dumper, and all that's supposed to do is you stick a cartridge in it and it reads the information out of the cartridge. Well, again, without getting into a super deep dive into how a cartridge dumper works, their implementation of this was incredibly poor, and that led to a number of unique compatibility issues. So an old emulator, a poor attempt at a cartridge dumper, and you've got a system that really doesn't do well all around in terms of compatibility. This, in fairness, can and should sour people on the prospects of a system several years later that it has the same architecture. And I can understand, for example, the video that Pat and Ian did. They were passionate about being, very reticent to accept another swing at this type of design. But here's the thing. Things have changed since then. And according to folks that are familiar with the actual development of the Atari 2600 Plus, who came on recently, a few days ago, onto the AtariAge forums to answer questions from the public, we know a few things now. Among them are that we're not using a 12-year-old emulator anymore. We're using, relatively speaking, the latest and greatest version of Stella. And if one looks at the changelog or the release notes of Stella, you'll see there is a mountain of changes in the version of Stella that we expect to see with the Atari 2600 Plus versus the version from 10 plus years ago. So that is one significant improvement. The other issue becomes, have they learned from the lessons of the very poorly designed cartridge dumper that was created for the Retron 77. And by all accounts, I believe they have. Breaking news, relatively speaking, in the last few days, engineers from the development of the Atari 2600 shared some technical information, including some of the specifics of the types of cartridges that their implementation of a cartridge dumper is expected to handle. And in fairness, it handles significantly more than the Retron 77's cartridge dumper would. So, the Retron 77 sucked. The folks at Atari have actually made an attempt to learn from the lessons of that experiment, and based on the information they have shared, we should have reason to believe that many, not all, but many of the compatibility issues of the Retron 77 will not necessarily carry over to the Atari 2600 Plus. Now, there are a few notable exceptions. Not every cartridge is going to work out of the gate. I think the most disappointing one for many will probably be Pitfall 2, which, again, not to get too deep in the weeds, has a lot of really weird technology inside the cartridge that does not lend itself to emulation or, for that matter, having its ROM dumped very easily. Not to say it won't work when the system comes out in November, but I'm not too sure about the prospects on that one. Aside from that, known incompatibilities include games like Real Sports Boxing, but then again, I'm not sure I could name 5 people that have ever played Real Sports Boxing, and I know hundreds of Atari fans, and a handful of other games as well. The concerns that I've also seen people have are regarding the compatibility list and the way that compatibility has been articulated to the public by Atari. And here is where I am going to take issue with Atari. For some reason, Atari has chosen to include the deeply pornographic Atari 2600 games on its compatibility list. Now, in fairness, they haven't been tested yet. Listed as untested, but I have to shake my head and wonder, why would a company that is looking to presumably cast the widest net possible and sell the average consumer a product that is meant to play their favorites like Combat and Pac-Man and Asteroids, why do we need to know if this particular console can play, for example, the deeply pornographic and disturbing and troubling Custer's Revenge? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Presumably, your target market includes parents who want to share Atari with their kids, who want to show their families, their young ones growing up, what they played when they were little. Why does a deeply disturbing game about, well, doing terrible, I can't even say, YouTube would delete my channel if I described what the game is about. It's that disgusting. Why does Atari need to list the compatibility of these games? And it's not just that one. There's a number of games in that genre, again, on this list. And I just have to wonder, what on earth is Atari marketing thinking by making it a point to know whether or not these games play? They shouldn't even be on the list. If Atari is in fact watching this video, just take them off the list. I mean, whose sales are you worrying about losing here? Anyhow, let me get back onto this. I get a lot of the criticism. It's born from the experiences with the Retron 77, being gun-shy about willing to go and give trust again in a company to create a cartridge dumper emulator combo that lets you play cartridges. But I have to say, I really think we ought to just wait and see how this actually works when the system comes out. So I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And Atari, by the way, not for nothing, it's not easy to give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, let's look at some of your recent sojourns here. I can't help but take this little side trip. While I was looking up the compatibility list for the Atari 2600 Plus, I can't help but notice that one of the main pages on your site remains your commitment to AtariX, which is basically an NFT crypto scam. And yet, I use the S word here. I use it because, let's just be honest, all NFTs are a scam. So, Atari, if you're putting yourself behind Web3 and NFTs, What were you thinking? That market is dead, and it was never legitimate to begin with. Why is it that one of the key things on the Atari.com page is a link to your NFT pursuits? It's time to just cut bait on that one. Throw it down the memory hole. Pretend it never happened. So there you have it. My assessment is this could be a cool thing. I think people need to understand, especially the folks that are criticizing it, that this is not necessarily for them. If you're concerned about the compatibility of some obscure cartridge, that there might only be 100 of them out there in the world, you're not the audience for this thing. If you're concerned about the latest and greatest homebrew games being supported or not supported on this, you're not the audience for this thing. The audience for the thing is the average general public that had Atari cartridges back in the day, or someone in their family did. They've got this cool box of things sitting in a desk drawer in the basement somewhere, and they'd like to try them out, but they don't have an old CRT TV. The folks that are the most hardcore complainers about all the little minute details of this don't need this product. They already have an Atari, they already have a CRT, and they're happily playing their games in their basement while their mom makes them Hot Pockets, and they wonder if they're ever going to get laid. Sorry, I know, that was a little stiff. But sometimes your old Uncle Doug has to call it like he sees it. So there you go. I think it's going to be a cool product. I will freely admit, in the interest of full disclosure, I did order one. I paid full price, not asking for any freebies from Atari, especially after I basically called their marketing into question. I'm sure they wouldn't send me one anyway, but I'm going to go ahead, and when I receive it, I'm going to open it up, I'm going to play it, I'll do a follow-up video giving my thoughts, and I hope you'll stick around to enjoy it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of It's All Doug in Games. I'm really loving to hear your thoughts about this whole situation in the comments below. Let's have some constructive dialogue. Let's keep the ad hominem to a minimum, and let's keep the fun to a maximum. Well, folks, thank you again for watching. We'll see you next time on It's All Doug in Games.